McBride is here, the District Attorney's Office Chief, Assistant District Attorney, and Samantha Grants in the back, who's our Chief of Staff. Thank you all for being here. We truly believe that journalism is what saves democracy, and I promised during my campaign to be transparent with information and data, which is the reason we called this press conference today, to do a recap of 2020, what the District Attorney's Office has done, and why we are optimistic about moving forward in 2021. So again, good morning. I'm very proud to call Hinds County my life home, where me and my wife raised our 3 children. Like you and all the citizens of Hinds County, we want a safe community that we can be proud of and a brighter future than what we've had thus far. As you all know, 2020 presented unsurmountable challenges to the criminal justice system. We saw the largest murder rate in Hinds County in recent memory. We saw skyrocketed numbers of domestic violence, and also crime, like in Mississippi, rose throughout the nation. The question that the citizens should ask of the District Attorney is, what do we do from here, and where do we go? The first issue I'd like to talk to you about is safety. When you have a high number of crime, you have a high number of arrests. We had that in Hinds County. And because of those arrests, the District Attorney's Office was charged with doing certain things. We were charged with evaluating every arrest that was made and also prosecuting those individuals. So I'm proud to report in 2020, we indicted 1,422 individuals who have committed 2,083 separate crimes. I want to say that number again. 1,422 separate individuals have been indicted by the Hinds County District Attorney's Office, and 2,083 crimes were committed. Of those numbers, 579 of the 1,422 indictments contain one or more charges that were violent crimes. So in essence, we have 579 violent crimes that encompass anything from murder to rape to aggravated assault. Of the 843 of those indictments were nonviolent offenses. So we are working. We did not take one break of 1 week in 2020 independent of COVID. Someone was staffed in the District Attorney's Office, and we're ensuring that we were moving forward by indicting and prosecuting cases. Now, victims is one of the things, I want to now talk about victims. Victims is one of the most significant complaints that we have in our county, that we're respecting victims, that we are not doing anything to re-victimize victims. So one of the things that we did in January of 2020 was that we immediately started reaching out to victims in the first place. So what would normally happen is that victims would be in contact with law enforcement, JPD, the Sheriff's Office, Clinton, and Byram. But on all homicide cases, we reached out to the family within 2 weeks whenever possible, and we were proud to acknowledge that we personally met with more than 500 victims of crimes in 2020. That's significant, but it's not enough. As we increase our resources, we plan to meet with victims earlier in their case. One of the biggest complaints that we heard about previous administrations was that victims did not know the status of their case or what was happening. So what we did is we chose to make victims our priority, and again, we hope to, in 2021, meet with at least 1,000 victims, if COVID allows those things. But we feel like the victims have to be the center of how we restore trust in the District Attorney's Office. The third thing I'd like to talk to you about is our indictments. As many of you know, we had a significant number of a backlog of indictments. I'll be frank and tell you that we found rooms of indictments that we did not know that existed. However, I'm proud to report the hard work of our grand jury team. We are caught up on indictments. We now get cases and we indict them within 60 to 90 days, which is the national average. We're very proud of this because what this allows us to do is, one, we ensure that if an individual is released on bond, we can revoke their bond if they commit a crime that's punishable by 5 years and a day. In addition, we ensure that we're protecting the defendant's constitutional rights, and we're not having the issues at the jail dealing with the federal consent decree. So I think one of the most significant accomplishments we had was how we dealt with the backlog of indictments. We now get cases and we try to indict them as quickly as possible, because the best averages in the country is from indictment to commission of a crime to conviction is a year. That's our goal. We're nowhere near that right now, but that's what we're striving to be for in 2021. In addition, plea offers were a significant change for us in 2020. Too often we've heard people say that Jackson, Hinds County was a place of catch and release. We ensured that this would no longer be the case by developing systems of uniformity of pleas, that a life in Jackson and Hinds County is the same as a life anywhere in the state of Mississippi. We now know that anybody who commits a homicide will not have some slap on the wrist in Hinds County. they will be held accountable. We ensure that moving forward, and that will be for years to come. One of the things that have always been most important to me is smart justice. That was my platform in 2019 when I ran for office, and it remains something that's important to us today. I'm proud to report that we were able to divert 300 nonviolent first-time offenders from the criminal justice system, as well as another 237 cases of individuals where we just didn't have sufficient evidence at the time to prosecute them. So that's a total of 537 cases that we were able to divert from the criminal justice system. So while we are indicting individuals who commit crimes, in addition, we also are living true to our values of ensuring that everyone does not need to be in the criminal justice system, particularly when we have issues of mental health issues that we're still trying to resolve. The next steps that we're most proud of are our partnerships. Over the last year, we've tried to let people know that Hinds County is open for business to work with our partners, federal and state. We met with the Commissioner of Public Safety and Sean Tyndall. We met with the Lieutenant Governor and all elected officials, and they see a change in Hinds County. We were able to work with the U.S. Attorney's Office and U.S. Attorney Hurst, and weekly I personally talk to members of the U.S. Attorney's Office about crime in Hinds County. We're really proud that we have recently made an agreement with the DEA, the United States Department of Justice, and the Drug Enforcement Administration here in Hinds County, because we recognize the nexus between drugs and all crime. And I believe that's the first time the Hinds County DA's office has been on a task force with the DEA. So we look forward to more partnerships in 2021. We can't solve crime by ourselves. We're working with our neighboring counties in Warren and in Madison and Rankin County to prosecute the same individuals who would ravage our counties. We think that's successful, and we expect to do more as we move forward in 2021. And lastly but not least, I just want to give a special thanks to all the crime law enforcement individuals in the county, from Byram to Clinton, certainly Jackson Police Department and Jackson Public Schools, and the Hinds County Sheriff's Office, including the State Auditor, MBI, and MBN. We are working with all of them to ensure we have a brighter future in Hinds County. I think we have a lot to be excited about. I want to also let you know that there's a lot of dedicated individuals, lawyers, investigators, administrative staff, who are working in the Hinds County District Attorney's Office daily to ensure that we are safe. I hope if you take the time to realize how hard these individuals are working, how much sacrifice that they put in making sure that our county is safe, that our brighter days are ahead of us. We expect bigger and bolder numbers in 2021, and hopefully at that time we can get a hold of some of the things that have been holding our city under siege. With that, I'm happy to take any questions about anything that I mentioned. I know oftentimes people ask questions about cases, and we have been limited on some of those things, as you know, because the rules of professional conduct prohibit some of it, and we can only talk about some cases when they are resolved themselves. So hopefully this year we'll be able to talk about a lot of those cases.
Let me ask you about the numbers you had. You said more than 1,000 cases got indicted.
1,422 cases have been indicted. How
many of those individuals are in a prison right now off the streets of Jackson for, I don't know, 5 to 10 years? Or are they going to be in prison for 6 months and be back on the streets of Jackson?
So indicted means they're currently in the jail process. Some of those individuals have pleaded out. For example, most recently in the last 2 weeks, I believe one of the individuals involved in the shooting of Pastor Longino got 35 years in maximum security prison, and the 2 other defendants in that case. And I'm only mentioning that because that's one of the cases resolved. What's important to know is that during COVID, we had the challenge, the safety challenge of ensuring that individuals who were in that jail in Raymond were individuals who had committed violent offenses and were not eligible for bond. We worked to reduce that population by 25%, but all violent offenders stayed there. So a lot of the individuals who are currently in jail, those individuals who committed, I think it's greater than about 85% of individuals who committed violent crimes are currently in jail. Our challenge is actually getting the difference between indictments and convictions, right? Because we're not having court frequently enough because of the COVID outbreak. The judges certainly are still having trials. I think we had a trial last week in Judge Wood's courtroom. So we're still having court. The courthouse is open, but our challenge is actually having trials because we make plea offers on all cases. That's really important to me. The individuals have a plea offer. They will know how much time they will serve, and the system will be moving. But oftentimes, if an individual, particularly a violent crime individual, is facing 30 or 40 years or life, the incentive for them to take the plea is not there. They want to go to trial and roll the dice. Yes, sir.
Do you have any numbers on bond revocations?
I don't have the number on bond revocations in front of me. One of the challenges that we have is that we have antiquated software. It's very difficult for us to keep the data that we want to be. We've looked at getting upgraded systems and working with the Board of Supervisors on providing that. I will tell you this, that our specific directive for me is that anytime a violent offender has committed an offense while he or she is out on parole, that we immediately move to revoke their bond. Now, whether the judges grant that, that's in their prerogative, but we think it's important that we do that, because if you're out on bond and you already have criminal charges, you have to respect the dignity of Hinds County to not commit other offenses. So we were revoking everyone's bond by choice.
I want to ask you about a specific case. Cedric Willis was murdered a couple of years ago. JPD arrested 2 suspects, but they have, last time I checked, not yet been indicted. Do y'all have any updates on that case?
Any kind of that one?
DeBrecco, Williams, and Corey Brent?
Yeah, I believe that's the one that I spoke to you about.
A while back.
Yeah, a while back, and it's still under investigation with JPD. I've asked them to bring us the case, but they have not brought it in and checked it in yet. I believe it's Detective Caston's case.
One of the challenges that we have that I think that we want to make sure the public knows is that when a crime is committed, it can be anywhere between 30 days or 6 months or longer before we actually have the file in the case to do something with. That's why when you look at the criminal justice system being slow, there are tons of things that could create that environment. For one, testing of DNA, testing of gun residue, testing of ballistics with bullets. All that information ideally is sent to the state crime lab or individuals, and then once that's done, we have further suspects provided to us. That is the delay in the backlog. I will tell you one of the challenges that we have. Before last year, we had 88 autopsies that were outstanding before the Mississippi State Crime Lab. And as you know, we had 137 murders in our county last year. So if you do that together, that's just a backlog on getting those things done. That's one of the reasons that we've been working with the state legislature, including, again, Commissioner Tyndall, and acknowledging the seriousness of that. Because an autopsy, more times than not, is necessary to have the best evidence possible to get a conviction. And generally, right now, we're reevaluating the rules. The Mississippi Supreme Court recently determined that you can actually let the state forensic autopsy doctors testify via deposition, I believe was the ruling by the Supreme Court. So people recognize the problems that we face. They realize where we started, but I think that we are working on those solutions. But to your point, if an individual commits a crime that takes the life of someone, we of course are asking for no bond. But currently the bond is set by the municipal judges and not the circuit court judges. Our challenge as we go into 2021 is to get more staff to cover those hearings at the municipal level, so we can initially make sure those individuals who are the most dangerous among us will not be out.
What about?
But you do have the, you do have the option to appeal that bond to circuit if you don't agree with the municipal judges.
I think that generally what we're finding is that we have the option of upon time of them being indicted. So the immediate bond is already set. There's nothing we can do at that point in time. If we indict them and the KPS is entered, if the judge brings them back in, generally the judges are relying on the bond of the original judges because they were there and the evidence was presented to them. I think that's been the best practices generally, but we want to make sure that the bonds are consummate with the crime. But we're seeing significant bonds in Hinds County in a lot of cases. I think it's a misnomer to say we don't have $500,000 bonds or $750,000 bonds. We do. Now there are outliers for whatever reason that discretion is in there, but we have significant bonds. I get motions all the time in our office asking for bonds to be reduced because the individual can't do that. So I think judges are doing their job more in part whenever the evidence supports that.
You talked about indictments. Do you have any numbers on convictions?
We do not. That's one of the data points that we're trying to create a system to do so. I think that we're resolving cases, whether by plea or by trial. Because of COVID, we've not been able to have the number of jury trials that we'd like because we couldn't safely, certainly for at least 4 to 5 months of the year, have the number of jury trials. I think if you ask around the state, you will find that Hinds County has the most jury trials in their jurisdiction just by sheer volume. And in fact, I think that's something that helps us be particularly strong because our office is willing to try cases. But overall, this time next year, I hope to have the data and the systems to track that and let you know that.
And did I hear correctly, you said you helped reduce the population at the jail in Raymond by 25%?
At the time that we were tasked with doing so.
When you came into office? Since then?
Since then. Well, ultimately, we had individual cases that were not moving. So cases move because the judicial system is working, offers are made, people can choose to accept those, or you're prioritizing the individuals who've been there the longest. We work with Sheriff Vance on that and his team. They provide us a weekly and a monthly list of how many individuals have been there the longest, and we prioritize those cases. Some of those cases are difficult because if you've been there a long time, it's generally for something like a mental health evaluation that's outside our control. I know we had one individual who had been there 4.5 years. He was a subject of a Clarion Ledger article. His name escapes me, but I know we resolved that case, and he's now in MDOC's custody. But no one should be in a short-term holding facility for a period that long. And we understand that, and that's a failure on our part if we're not doing all we can. We have an individual there right now that we're trying to get out who's been there for a couple of years now. The lawyers have to help us out on the other side as well, but we certainly are prioritizing trying those cases and also resolving those cases whenever possible.
Well, you said a lot of cases, well, I know it's been going on for years, well, it's like a trickle-down effect too, it's passed down to relatives, but seeing one individual responsible for several crimes, I mean, serious crimes, and are y'all seeing more and more, or just a reduction, or you seeing the rise of cases with one individual having multiple cases?
Well, I think in 2020 what we've seen, unfortunately, is that younger offenders are committing more violent crimes, and they're generally grafted in neighborhoods. So we see neighborhoods, turf wars, things of that nature. Not one individual, but I mean, what we've seen is individuals shooting in cars at a higher frequency. All of these individuals either know each other. We see the conflict occurring on social media. Certainly that they like to brag about their activities, but those individuals are all kind of some of the same groups of individuals, but not generally one individual. We saw that to some degree with all the burglaries. I think that group has been captured. Generally, we're doing a pretty good job at prosecuting those cases. That's why not just jury duty, but we really need the citizens to report what they see and what happens. We're capturing a lot of individuals by things like Ring cameras, the cameras that people have in their homes. If a crime occurred that way, that's pretty critical evidence. I know JPD is moving toward the photo center. We want to shift our resources toward tag centers, tag readers. We think tag readers are significant throughout Hinds County. We know that Byram and Clinton are using those. They're really expensive. You certainly see the cameras throughout Jackson as well. So I think that people are recognizing the need to get better cases and provide that to our office so we can get the prosecutions.
How many outstanding autopsies do you have right now at the State Crime Lab?
At the State Crime Lab, if you count all the ones from last year, assume they've been submitted, we're going to be right at about 200, 210.
So that's 210 or so murders that you're waiting on results to come back from the crime lab. You can't prosecute until they come back, correct?
For the most part, but we are still making offers. We think if it's video
Right.
footage showing that you shot somebody, that's sufficient. You know, the purpose of the autopsy generally is to show how an individual passed away. You know, if there's something in question. But on a lot of this, at least I guess half of those, we think the evidence is sufficient for what we already know. Whether the individual's already acknowledged that he or she shot the individual, or alternatively there's video footage or eyewitness testimony.
How bad is the backlog? You know, when people mention so-and-so's been in jail for, say, 5 years, 7 years, and he still hasn't gone to trial. But when you dig into the cases, a lot of times those are actually, you're waiting on evaluations from Department of Mental Health. How bad is the problem right now waiting on mental health evaluations?
I think it's probably about 10%, less than 10% of our group. I don't think it's as large as we thought it was originally. Now, the problem is those same individuals might lapse for 4 or 5 years. When we're looking at restoring competency, which is kind of, you know, as you know, the legal term there, to determine if someone is incompetent or not competent to stand trial is one issue, but the other issue is determining whether or not they can be restored to competency. Because generally if individuals are medicated appropriately, there's a large percentage chance they can be restored to competency, but on many instances they just cannot.
Where do we stand on Alonzo Stewart? That was one of those cases. Murder the grandmother.
I believe that if that's the case, it's in front of Judge Kidd, which I believe it is, that most recently there was a hearing to determine that he cannot be restored to competency. That was the most recent medical examination. One of the good things about mental health and competency laws in the state of Mississippi is that we require doctors to come testify under oath that the individual can't be restored after a reasonable degree of medical certainty after trying. His is a scary one, unfortunately, because in Mississippi we don't have criminal commitment, and Jamie will correct me if I'm wrong, we have a civil commitment. So ultimately what generally happens is that we have to release individuals from the criminal case for them to be civilly committed to Whitfield. We know we have a significant shortage of beds, so what ultimately happens is Whitfield can determine how long they would treat that individual. So if you've been deemed mentally incompetent to stand trial, you go in the whip field for a period of time that we no longer control. Now, obviously, that does not give victims any sense of relief. So that process takes generally between, I've seen it last as long as 3 or 4 years by my review. So you have an individual who has not been convicted of a crime, who's in jail, trying to determine if she or he is mentally competent for 3 or 4 years. But generally, those are the ones that have committed a violent crime. A life has been lost. So that's where we have a lot of work to do, I think, in the legislature about holding the system more accountable there, or what more we can do, because it's a serious issue, and one is too many.
I'm sorry, let me just follow up. You said there are 210 bodies at the state crime lab.
Not bodies at the state crime lab. The state crime lab process is, I think the question was how many autopsies are outstanding. Because what happens is
The
results. So the autopsy is done immediately. It has to, based on the composition of the body. So that's the problem, that the state crime lab has so few resources and individuals that they can do the autopsy immediately, but there are tests that have to be done. If you've seen an autopsy before, the human body is actually cut open, organs are removed, testing, and that's all testing to come back, and then the report has to be done with that. The challenge has been that we have had some turnover there and some restrictions there. And I can't speak to that, but I can tell you that it's a serious problem. We've priced internally the cost of doing outside autopsies, and before this year, we looked at almost nearly $1 million to get the ones we had outstanding. It's $10,000 to $15,000, I believe, from coming to do it, to redo it, and to come testify. Forensic pathology is a serious issue. We don't have, I believe, a clinical program that does for forensic pathology in Mississippi. I'd love for us to have one, but that's a very serious issue for getting it done. And I think that actually might be the most significant issue on getting prosecution cases for the remainder of my term. But I know a lot of smart people are committed to working on that and doing what they can.
Do you have any information on the shooting at former U.S. Attorney Greg Davis's home?
I have seen the video. And I think the individuals have determined the caliber of weapon used, but I don't have any information I can divulge at this time about the prosecution of that case or the investigation of that case.
Is your office involved?
Well, since it occurred in Hinds County, we are the feds have dual jurisdiction on whether or not we can prosecute that case. So we certainly hope to bring those to justice who would do that to our public officials, or anybody for that matter. And thoughts and prayers go out to the former U.S. Attorney. Any other questions?
Actually, I've got one. This will be more of a policy question, though. Violent crime, when you're convicted, you go to NDOC, you're generally eligible for a 50% release in those cases. Nonviolent crime, for example, you're prosecuting the John Davis, the DHS scandal right now. So you're talking about people who supposedly embezzled several $1 million. You do your job, they get convicted, they go to NDOC, but say a guy that embezzles $2 million, he's eligible for 25% release, whereas a guy who, violent crime, only stole $500, he has to serve 50%. Do you think the 25% release for people like that, embezzlers, should be increased to 50%?
I certainly think that the amount of the money or harm done should calculate into the equation of punishment. I think there's certainly some inequitable principles in our criminal justice system that we're working on now. The Prosecutors Association, which I'm a member of, are actively engaged right now at the state capitol. But Mr. Davis' case is a good example that because it's a nonviolent offense, the 25% is something that gives me pause. I do think that the judges certainly would take into account the amount that's been alleged to have been stolen from the state of Mississippi there. In addition, Mr. Davis, I believe, is indicted on multiple counts, and when the judges determined that they were run consecutively or concurrently, I think will be taken into the equation too. I imagine those cases will be resolved sometime in 2021 is my hope. I think that we have news coming in on a series of cases in the next 7 days that I encourage you to continue to pay attention to.
Are you seeing a lot of rise in the online as far as threats to one another? People have been killed because of stuff like that.
Absolutely. In a perfect DA's office, we would have a position designated to Facebook and online information. We've seen the communication and threats there. I think it has a lot to do with the restrictions of COVID as well. I think that people are just communicating very blatantly threats to individuals, and I think there are certain bills in the Mississippi legislature this year that have been sponsored to deal with some of the harassment and threatening. There are 2 charges our office can bring related to intimidation via internet. Both are felonies cases, and we encourage individuals to press charges on those like they would anything else. I think ultimately that's where it's starting at, and we can stop at that point. We can stop the things that are associated with that. So I'm gonna do one more question. Well, again, I thank you all for coming. We'll do this every year. We hope to have more data for you next year. We certainly hope to have more press conferences about cases when they resolve. After talking to the victims of every crime, we're willing to talk to you all. But again, the restrictions that we generally have are just because the cases are ongoing and we inherit a lot of cases. We probably have about more than 2,000 active cases in our office, which I think is just an insurmountable number, and we're doing each case every day, day by day. So again, thank you for being here, thank you for all you do, and we look forward to seeing you in 2021.